but I wanted to explore the holidays through the lens of the Torah reading, which means basically I have to do three things in introduction. The first introduction is to talk about how the Torah reading of Rosh Hashanah is different from other Torah readings. Secondly, I have to take a step back and talk about the significance of the Torah readings on the holidays and fast days and so on themselves. And then we'll go to the relationship to Rosh Hashanah. There are five biblical holidays. As well as Rosh Chodesh, which technically means that there are 17 to 18 biblical holidays a year. Most Torah readings on the holidays deal with the laws and practices of the holiday. The biblical holidays are Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the three pilgrimage festivals. Sukkot, an order of the festival cycle, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. That's one. Two, the majority of the holidays, their Torah reading, and I'll concentrate on the Torah reading in Israel. The Torah reading has to do with the events of the holidays. So Pesach, we discuss the Exodus, but as a filler, we discuss the laws of the holiday for the second day of Yom Tov, because we have another day in outside Israel. And the seventh day of Pesach, we discuss the stories of the Exodus, of the splitting of the sea, and again, for a filler, we use the discussion of the holidays in Parsha Re'eh. On Shavuot, we read once again the story of the giving of the Torah, and for filler, we do the laws of the holidays, the laws of the holidays again. Maftir is always about the holiday sacrifices. Then on Sukkot, we read in the first place, both on Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret, we read the account of all the observances and practices of all the holidays of the year. Because Sukkot doesn't have a particular historical event, we read the Torah readings that deal with all the holidays. Except in Israel, the Torah reading of Shmini Atzeret is supplanted by the Torah reading of ending Zot HaBracha and beginning Breshit, Simchat Torah. Because in Israel, Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah are the same day. But at any rate, only Sukkot, if we look at the way the holidays are celebrated in Israel, only Sukkot gets a reading of the laws of the holidays as a whole. Every other holiday has the events of the holiday. On Yom Kippur, we read the portion that deals with the laws of the holiday, because again, the event of Yom Kippur is the giving of the second tablet, which gets a few verses and we read on a fast day anyway. So, on Yom Kippur, we read the laws of the holiday. Because also Yom Kippur is essentially, it's not the product of an event. Because on Yom Kippur, the Jewish people were forgiven, God declared it the Day of Atonement. But Yom Kippur is entirely a ritual and theological holiday. Yom Kippur is a holiday God designed in which we get atonement. So it's all about ritual and theology and the relationship of us to God. Yom Kippur is the only purely religious holiday that isn't really also a historic holiday in the biblical holidays. Even Sukkot commemorates God, and again, because Sukkot commemorates us being in the desert, but doesn't have a particular historical event, so Yom Kippur and Sukkot get a discussion of the laws of the holiday. Shmini Atzeret would also get a discussion of laws of the holiday, but in Israel it's pushed off to ending the Torah and beginning the Torah. And last of all, Rosh Hashanah has neither a historical account of the holiday, of the whole, nor does it have a discussion of the laws of the holiday except the Maftir, which discusses the sacrifices. But Rosh Hashanah, also another point. On Sukkot, we read the whole Torah reading. We read the whole account of all the holidays. Yom Kippur is big enough in the Torah, Parshat Achremot, to have a Torah reading that includes all the events of Yom Kippur, because it's long. Rosh Hashanah has a line in Emor and in Re'eh, and so it has a line, so you can't do a Torah reading, but it's now. What would be the historical event that we would read in Rosh Hashanah? Yeah, the creation of the world and the creation of Adam. Now you should know that when the temple was standing, there were every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They would fast. There were groups of Israelites who would fast and read the Torah for that day of the week. They would meet on Sunday. In other words, since the sacrifices in the temple were brought for everyone, representing the whole Jewish people, so the Israelites, not Kohanim Levim, there would be groups of Israelites who would attend the sacrifice in Jerusalem. Another group of Israelites, this was a voluntary society composed of 24 groups that corresponded to the 24 families of priests. And whenever their family of priests was doing their thing in Jerusalem, they would send representatives to Jerusalem. And in addition, they would meet in their towns and fast 4 days a week, but read the Torah 6 days a week. And what they would read was the first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day of creation. But other than that, we do not have a Torah reading for the days of creation, except when we actually read Bereshit, which we do essentially twice, once on Simchat Torah and once on the Shabbat after Simchat Torah. Okay? So Rosh Hashanah, we do not read the account of creation. Indeed, there is a debate in the Talmud as to if God created Adam on the first day of Rosh Hashanah or on the first day of Nisan. That being said, the general premise is that the accepted resolution is that God created the world in thought in Nisan, but only in actual time and space in Tishrei. But putting that resolution aside, the fact is that the historical events that Rosh Hashanah commemorates are halachically so little relevant to the holiday that there can even be a debate about them. But at any rate, putting all that aside, Rosh Hashanah is the holiday where the rabbinic, very early in the Second Temple, when the Torah readings were established, Rosh Hashanah got a Torah reading not about the nominal events of Rosh Hashanah, at least according to most opinions, and not about the observance of Rosh Hashanah, which would be a very short Torah reading, but about two events that by tradition, happened on Rosh Hashanah. The binding of Isaac on the second day, and the birth of Isaac that we read on the first day. The question, when it says that God remembered Sarah, it tells us that either she conceived or gave birth on Rosh Hashanah. But at any rate, Isaac's coming into this world, however you define it, took place on Rosh Hashanah, because the purpose of creation of man is ultimately actualized through the Jewish people. And Isaac really is the beginning of the Jewish people, because Abraham had children who were not Jews, but Isaac only had children who were Jews. Esav is considered a disobedient Jew. His children were non-Jews because he didn't marry a woman who bought into the Jewish people thing. But Esav was Jewish, and Isaac is the perfect one of the Avot. He's the one who was offered up to God, as we read the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Isaac is the one who never left Israel, which is sort of the ideal state for a Jew. And Isaac is the one who had only one wife. And Isaac is the one, and Isaac is the one who begins the uniqueness of the Jewish people, because Abraham, again, has many roles. His job is to be father of the Jews, but also father of many nations all over the world. But Yitzchak's job is to be the father of the Jews. So Yitzchak represents the beginning of the Jewish people, among other things, which is the culmination, it's the actualization of the purpose of the creation of the world. And so the very first point I would make about all this is that the reason we read the birth of Yitzchak on Rosh Hashanah, and now in Israel we read both because Israel has 2 days, as you know. Rosh Hashanah is the one holiday that has 2 days, and we could discuss the reason later. But the simple point is that both the binding of Isaac and the birth of Isaac are read on Rosh Hashanah everywhere in the world. What we would do in the temple, where there's only 1 day, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Because even during the Second Temple period, most Rosh Hashanahs were 2 days, which is something we can talk about at another point. But just a fact for now, historical fact. Okay, so now we get to the issue of the Torah reading. So the first point is we read about the birth of Isaac because that represents the culmination of the purpose of the creation of the world. We read about the binding of Isaac because this absolute commitment and obedience to God is the essence of what we do on Rosh Hashanah, and how Rosh Hashanah is different from Yom Kippur. And once we understand those things, we can delve into the actual Torah readings. So let me please begin with this idea. So the birth of Isaac is this idea that God creates a world, there's a flood, and now we're on plan B, and in plan B there's going to be one people who is going to be asked to be the focus of God's revelation of the world and ultimately get it out to everyone else. That people is expressed in the one child, Yitzchak, and since the purpose of the creation of the world is, which is an idea in Rosh Hashanah, but the purpose of the existence of the world is that God be made a dwelling place in it, that it attain its perfection by the free will of people, and the free will of people is the fulcrum, the focus, though not the exclusive purpose is the free will of the Jewish people, right? So we now have the idea of Yitzchak's birth being the great theme of Rosh Hashanah because it marks the beginning of the exclusivity of the mission of the Jewish people. And by the way, that is why we have there are many reasons given why the expulsion of Hagar is mentioned. But one of them is quite simply that Hagar and Ishmael made a claim to be equally part of the covenant. And God told Abraham, I know you love them, but Sarah's right. Sarah understands what I want more than you do. And if they claim to have any part of the covenant, we have to send them away because the covenant is only with Yitzchak. The covenant that I promised you and I told you to leave your land is only with Yitzchak. In other words, part of Rosh Hashanah is that the Jewish people are alone. Without them, the purpose of the world cannot be fulfilled, though everyone else has a role in it. That's why God says, I'll bless them too, and so on. But the bottom line is that the purpose of the world cannot be fulfilled without the Jewish people being uniquely, exclusively, and entirely, devotedly the Jewish people. And if anyone were ever to make a claim that they have some share in this without being part of the Jewish people, we have to make a clear division. And this is why we read this account too. In other words, to understand that there are not multiple paths to the purpose of creation. There is a single path that has room for everyone ultimately. But the fulcrum, in other words, the communication of what God wants from humanity is through the Jewish people. There are multiple purposes and roles and multiple gifts that God gives by divine providence to all of humanity. But there is only one path of revelation. There is only one path through which God actually tells humanity, this is what I want. There are not multiple revelations. This is Judaism's claim. One that, again, this is not saying that there isn't value, even religions that disagree, that are not accepting the ideas of Judaism. There's a value in the human being and the human soul. There may be great value in what people believe and do. But in terms of God directly communicating with human beings, he did communicate with Bilam and a few others. But essentially God's communication to humanity is through the Jewish people. Direct revelation, indirect revelation, you know what? I do not doubt that there is indirect revelation of God's greatness and the work of, what's his name? Linnaeus, the one who did, the whole, what's the whole system of life? Was it Linnaeus was his name? The original system of classifying life. Linnaeus. Right, so there's, and in Newton, and in, and in Tchaikovsky, whether we like his lifestyle or not, there's no question that God is revealed in everything in nature, and especially in everything the human brain comes up with. There's no question that God is revealed in Isaac Newton's work and so on, or in Euclid for that matter, though he may have been a pagan and so on. But in terms of God directly revealing what he wants from humanity, not implication, but communication with it, even as a Jew. A lot of you people deal with test tubes or the human body or whatever it is. So there's no question that reveals God's wisdom, and it's an important aspect. But in terms of revealing what God actually wants from you, that's through the Torah that God revealed to you, and in turn we reveal to the rest of humanity. So this is the crucial point. There is no religious relativism. There is value, I think, I understand, to all human endeavor and anyone who sincerely seeks to find the truth. But direct communication from God about what God wants from the time of Isaac passes through only the Jewish people. Even if God talked to Bilam or Job, that was in the context of the Torah. Doesn't mean the only people who hear from God are Jews, but it's always in the context. The revelation is entirely through Judaism and about Judaism.
But not now.
Now you have the Torah. You don't need it. All of the revelation is gravy. You have the Torah. God revealed. And when God gave the Torah, which is presaged by the election of Yitzchak and the driving out of Ishmael. Remember, because God went to all the nations later. But the bottom line is that when the Torah is given, that represents the final communication from God as to what he wants. God elaborates through the prophets, but everything he elaborates on is what he already elaborated, what he revealed in the Torah. The prophets, as Maimonides put it, give us encouragement and, shall we say, color in observing the Torah, but it's all in the Torah. So it is today. The Torah is being given at every moment. But the point of Rosh Hashanah is that God created the world for the purpose, and that purpose is revealed through the Jewish people, which in turn they share with everyone. Which is why at the end of this Torah portion, that we have this whole story with Avimelech, right? And Avimelech has to recognize Abraham's greatness. And at the same time, what happens is that at the end, right? God tells Hagar, "I hear his voice. I'll make him into a great nation," and so on and so forth, right?
But how Abimelech's story fits in what he has?
The Abimelech story fits in because they make this covenant, and Abimelech is forced to recognize. Abimelech is forced to recognize Avram's all alone, but he's forced to recognize by divine strength. He's forced to recognize Avram's place in the land and so on. He has to make a covenant with him as equals. Abimelech recognizes that ultimately the ultimate power in the world is expressed through Avram. That's part of the point. Then we get to the binding of Isaac, where basically God tells Avram, this whole plan I had to be the focus of the world, go destroy the world. In other words, was Avram able, but we'll talk more about that Kedah another time later, because that's already a second point. So it seems to me that the point of Rosh Hashanah is right, that at Rosh Hashanah we accept, as we read in the Davening, we accept God's rulership over us. It's a general acceptance. And rulership means to say we accept our role and our purpose in the world. Now that role and purpose affects the whole world. Rosh Hashanah, the whole world is Jewish. But the ultimate expression of the completeness of the world's purpose is that as defined in Judaism. Not Judaism itself, because that's only for Jews. But the role and purpose and harmony the world needs is defined in Judaism. So this is what we say, that the creation of the world is renewed because we, the Jewish people, commit both on our behalf and on behalf of how we have to influence others for the that basically we accept and commit to God's agenda for creation, which gives God an excuse to continue the work. And we see this with the birth of Yitzchak in the way that, on one hand, even someone, and remember, this is Abraham's child. Hagar was not an insignificant person. She was a great person. God talked to her. Angels talked to her. Ishmael is a great person. As great as they are, there are not, in other words, being spiritually great and being divinely inspired and being incredibly, spiritually aware, none of that means anything in the context of the purpose of creation, which is that there is a message that comes from God. It's not that it's quiet, direct, and specific both to Jews and to non-Jews. And it is this idea that the fulcrum, that the single node of communication of God's purpose, to be that node, to be that window, is the Jewish people's job. This is what Rosh Hashanah is about, that we accept our role on behalf of the whole world, hence the connection between the Jewish people accepting God and the whole world's continuation of the whole world's purpose. And at the same time, we recognize that we have an awesome responsibility. Once we send Hagar and Ishmael away, by the way, that's the relationship. Once we send Hagar and Ishmael away, we know there's only one way for God's purpose to be fulfilled. That's Yitzchak. Then the next day we say, go blow it up. It was 37 years later. But God says, go blow it up, which is the great test. Because once we send Ishmael away, we've already established that the only path is through Yitzchak. Again, which doesn't mean everyone needs to be Jewish. It means that there is a single path of revelation, and that's the Jewish people's job, to be that lens. Essentially, and it is, a lens is a good word, because if you think about it, what a lens does is it takes a picture and it focuses in such a way that it can be shared and understood and utilized and analyzed. God created a world. The world is foggy. There's a million philosophies. There are a million conclusions one can come to the world, including that there's no rhyme or reason to it or no justice in it. The Torah focuses that. It tells us what we should derive from, what we shouldn't, what God wants us to do with the world, Jews and non-Jews. So there's a lens. And the Jewish people in the Torah form the elements of those lenses. In order for a lens to function, it needs to have various elements. If you make a lens out of fiber optics, there are different, as you know, there are different qualities within a given optic strand, or all the optic strands which do the same thing a multi-element lens does. But this is about optics. In other words, the Jewish people and the Torah together, they form this optic that focuses this inchoate, unfocused world we have, and it gives it meaning and purpose for everyone. But as we all know, that if you're gonna that a focus demands a point of focus. That's to be a single point at which everything focuses, and if that point is infinitesimally small, and you can't get to an infinitely small point of focus. But the smaller the point of focus, as you know, the better the picture you get on the other end. And this is what's going on with Yitzchak, and this is what's going on with Ishmael. And Avimelech demonstrates that even this powerful king, he recognizes the purpose of Avram. He makes a covenant with him, rather than simply trying to drive him away.
At the same time, there is this midrash that this covenant with Avimelech was the
Sin that caused.
sin
Right, it's actually not a midrash. It's actually not a midrash. It's I forget who said it, because I didn't come prepared to talk about it. But I think the Ramban actually might
Can you
be the
tell
one who
what
says
is
that.
it, because I'm familiar, I don't know what.
He made a covenant with Avimelech, and since the land was his, he ought to have had more trust in the God and then make a covenant. But I would say that there's no contradiction Because the fact that Avimelech felt driven to make a covenant with Avram demonstrates his appreciation for Avram's greatness above and beyond the power that Avram controlled at the time. Whether Avram should have acquiesced to that covenant is a separate question. That Avimelech sought the covenant meant he recognized the important role of Avram.
Right, but if he didn't acquiesce, and then
No, he.
Avimelech would.
No, but the point is that Avimelech's asking for the covenant demonstrated a recognition of Avram's role. With Avram's response should have been to make a covenant of equals is a separate question. And not everyone says it was a bad thing. But if you say it was a bad thing, it's Avram's acquiescence. Avimelech's request demonstrates this idea that even at this very early stage of history, there's a recognition of how central and impossible to get rid of the Jews are. Because as long as there's a few Jews left, they'll come back. You know, at one point we were down to one person. That's Yitzchak, right? So we have three components of the Torah reading: Yitzchak's birth, the difference between Yitzchak and the other children of Abraham, and then the account of Avimelech recognizing that as if it were the world has changed. And that's why the Rosh Hashanah is a holiday for the whole world, and the whole world is judged. It's especially incumbent upon the Jewish people that they make this commitment. And again, it's not about details. There's no details, right? The whole Torah reading of Rosh Hashanah deals with stuff before the giving of the Torah. We don't have all the details of the laws and the sacrifices and the shofar blowing, right? The Torah reading simply tells us that the purpose of Rosh Hashanah is recommitting ourselves to our unique and indispensable purpose. Yom Kippur, we talk about all the things we should have done and did that we shouldn't have. We talk about the details. Rosh Hashanah is just about the commitment. And we recognize that each one of us is Yitzchak, because collectively, all the Jewish people represent collectively the single person, the single focus. Without one of us committing and being a Jew and living as we should, something's missing in the whole system. You know, it's very interesting that the Gemara says that God sees the ashes of, as if Isaac had been sacrificed, and his ashes gathered before him on the altar. What does it mean? It's a strange thing to say, sacrificed and burnt in his ashes. Because the truth is that when you burn something, you break it down to its constituent parts. And the idea is that Yitzchak is the source of the Jewish people. So you could say that, you know, look at all these Jews and they're scattered and not all doing what they should. God says, no, I see them as gathered together. I see the Jewish people as gathered together into a single unit. But that means that each one of us needs to do our thing for this single unit to function. And that's why our individual acceptance of our relationship to God. Rosh Hashanah is about, with the shofar and everything else, we talked about this in the past, but from the point of view of the Torah, it's about our accepting to be Yitzchak, our accepting to be with all the burdens and difficulties and tragedies it entails, and challenges, to be that focus through which we illuminate the whole world. Right? We don't annihilate Hagar and Ishmael. God blesses them. God promises Abraham that he blesses them. But they're not inheriting with Yitzchak. They're part of the larger picture. And this is what, and so on Rosh Hashanah, it's about the whole world, but it's about the understanding that for God's purpose to get through to the world, for the world to be able to exist as it's meant to, we have to accept our commitment and our role. And that's what Rosh Hashanah is. Rosh Hashanah, we say about, you know, crowning God as king. You know, it's very interesting, and this is a very important point about Rosh Hashanah, that in Judaism, a king is someone who the people accept. He may be an absolute monarch, but the people accept him. A ruler is imposed upon you, a Moshe. But a melech, a king, is you accept. Right? Had Saul not been accepted by the Jews, he wouldn't have been the king. Samuel gathers them together and says, accept him. When the Jewish people reject Rechavam, Solomon's son, they get another king. The 10 tribes are rejected. We choose God. That's what Rosh Hashanah is about. We choose to have a greater and deeper purpose and fuller purpose of creation. That validates creation. But we have to be Yitzchak. We have to recognize that we're going to benefit everyone, but we're also all alone. And it also means that that even though the necessary separation, the necessary focus on being Jews means you can't eat and recreate and marry everyone and so on and so forth, that's necessary for the welfare of the whole world. Just like sending Hagar and Ishmael away, as the Midrash says, was not just a benefit to Isaac, it was a benefit to Hagar and Ishmael too. That they could grow to be who they needed to be and develop into who they needed to be.
Did it benefit Ishmael as well?
Sure. Because had he stood in constant conflict, he was not capable of understanding Yitzchak's unique role. Because you have to be Yitzchak to understand. So it had been constant conflict. You know, Ishmael rightfully, this is well, in a sense, the tragedy here, but a necessary one in a sense. Ishmael rightfully says, I'm his kid too. What's the difference? God says, oh, Yitzchak is unique. So as long as Ishmael is there and insisting he's also a kid, you have fights. That's what the Torah says. He was laughing. He was joking, threatening to kill him. Once he goes away and develops into his own nation, he shall be a great nation, God tells Hagar, then he gets to do his thing. And he could do good things if he chooses to. Earlier in the account of Ishmael, where God promises him Isaac and he says, but wait, let Ishmael live before you, and God says he'll be a great nation, his hand will be against all and everyone's hand. It says that Yado Bakol, his hand will be in everyone, V'yodo Kobo, and everyone's hand will be in him. So the Sephorno remarks, there's a choice here. Either he'll be this difficult nation who's always fighting with everyone and who fights with all and all fight with him. Or he says his hand is in everyone, everyone's hand is in his, because they'll be exchanging things. They'll be great merchants. And they'll grease the economic levers. And there were times where Ishmael's descendants, where the Arabs were basically the whole connection of East and West. They were the economic engines of the Middle Ages. Or they can be the troublemakers of the world. That's their choice. But the potential is there. They'll be a great nation. There's a lot of their descendants, and they have the potential to do a lot of good things. They can either be engaged in fighting with everyone and do a great job of, bringing great turmoil and conflict to the world, or they can be involved in being the vectors to share knowledge and merchandise and ramp up the global economy as they have, and maybe they'll do it again. But these predictions are all in the Midrash. They all precede any of these events. So that's the interesting thing. The statements as to what Yod Bakol Yod Kobo was already alluded to well before the Arabs either had their golden age or conquered the world or became the primary troublemakers. So it's their choice. But certainly the potential is there.
It still is there?
Yeah. It could change tomorrow.
Hard to see today.
And you never can see things. You never see things. We never see what could be. Remember, the Muslim world, the Arab world are not the same thing. The descendants of Ishmael are neither, Indonesians nor Pakistanis nor Afghans and so on. But the larger picture, it's not just Ishmael. is also a deeper point here. Ironically, and this is a subtle point, but this is important. You know that on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the whole Jewish people stand together, without distinction between where they came from. The election of Yitzchak, which basically says that the definition of a Jew is not a descendant of the definition of that people charged with being the focus of God's revelation of the world, is not a descendant of Abraham, but someone who is a descendant of Yitzchak, because God chose Yitzchak. Yitzchak and Ishmael are both Abraham's children. Granted, only Yitzchak was Sarah's child, but Hagar was a great person herself. God chose Yitzchak. And that's why any Jew, even a Jew who converted to Judaism, they're all the same. Because Judaism is not about ethnicity. It's about God choosing you, which can come out ethnically or non-ethnically.
It's interesting, though, that the ger takes Ben Avraham, not Ben Yitzchak.
Because the ger stands in the place of Yitzchak. Who was Yitzchak? Yitzchak ben Avraham. The ger stands in the place. He's Avram's son. He is just like Yitzchak, because God chose him, and God asked him to be put on the altar, and so on.
I see.
The only Ben Avraham in the world, the only one who's called, right? The Yitzchak Ikar L'Chazara, only Yitzchak will be truly called your child. Ishmael is the son of Avraham, but he's not the Ben Avraham. Ben Avraham is only Yitzchak. So when we call a ger Ben Avraham, we're calling him or her a Yitzchak. You are uniquely Avram's child with that unique purpose, no difference from any other child of Avram. If we would call him Avram, if we would call him the son of Terah, or even the son of God, he's Ben Avram, like Yitzchak, the same as Yitzchak. And by the way, that's why with all the holidays, we constantly remind you to include the convert. Because you might think, okay, the convert's part of us now, but he's not part of a history. The history isn't history. All the holidays are about reliving these fundamental spiritual facts. And if you're part of it, you're part of it. There's a very interesting sociological phenomenon that the more ignorant people are, whether they're religious or not, the more likely they are to not be able to get their heads around the idea that a convert is the same Jew as anyone else. So you have Jews who are very traditional and so on, but aren't learned, and they have a very hard time. And conversely, you have a lot of assimilated Jews who basically don't see the fuss of making conversion difficult, because we all know they're not Jews anyways. It's just a externality. But if you believe in it and you understand it, then this is the idea. Yitzchak is the firstborn Jew, but he's not because he's the son of Abraham, because he's chosen. Now, that's the first. So that's the key point is that on Rosh Hashanah, on one hand, we accept our relationship to God on behalf of the whole world. But on the other hand, we understand that it's up to us. It's up to this very tiny, again, Jews represent a quantity in the world smaller than the margin of error of any estimation of the world's population. But nevertheless, we're also the focus. And I won't use an example from a particle, because I am suspecting more and more that in the next few years, the entire present model of physics is going to go down the drain. That's just my opinion. There's too many band-aids. We'll see. But at any rate, there are very little particles that are very important. Whatever model we come up with next, there'll be very little things that are very important. The Jewish people are such. Now we can begin reading through the Torah portion. But I have a very interesting interpretation that Marcus Lehman, who was a translator, he was a writer of Jewish novels for young people in late 19th century Germany. He also wrote a nice commentary parshiyot that we have in the Adams Street Synagogue. He edited a paper. He edited a youth paper, the Israelite, for Orthodox Jews in Germany. Very interesting. Those who accuse him of plagiarism don't understand that back in the late 19th century, plagiarism was considered a form of flattery. So he lifts liberally from various writers, but he did a lot of historical research, and if you read his books, especially the ones about medieval and early modern Jews in Europe, they're extremely accurate. I actually know a lot about European and medieval history, not from school, but from his books. Marcus Lehman quoted in the name of his great-great-great-grandfather, the person who was the preceptor of all the Jews in Germany in the 16th century, Rabbi Yosselman of Rosh Hashanah, which he wrote a 2-volume biography of him, which is very interesting. And he tells an answer he gave to a problem in this Torah reading that I never heard from anyone else. So, it says as follows: and Avram placed 7 ewe lambs by themselves. Verse 20 and 21. Avimelech said to Avram, what are these 7 ewe lambs you have placed by themselves? And he said, for these 7 ewe lambs, female lambs, you shall take from my hand in order that it be for me a witness that I dug this well. Right? They were fighting over the well, whether Avram dug the well or not. It says, take these lambs, for me they'll be a witness. The simple interpretation is take this gift as a sign that you agree that this is my well and that we're going to be friends. So the Rabbi Yossel asked the question. He says, wait a second. He says, why are these proof the well is mine? It might be an affirmation, a seal, a treaty, a brit, a covenant. Why are these proof that this well is mine? Take them from my hand. It's proof that it's mine. So, there's a story told that the Talmud says that if the early ones are like angels, we are merely like men. And if the era of the rabbis of the Mishnah were like men, we are like donkeys. But not like the donkey of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair was one of the Tanaim, one of the early rabbis of the Mishnah. And he had a donkey that was stolen. But the donkey refused to eat from the thieves' food. So, feeling bad for the donkey, they brought it back to Rabbi Pinchas. And they said, well, you can't prove we took it, but if we did, we'd like to know why your donkey wouldn't eat from our perfectly good fodder. So he says, do you guys take the tithes properly? It was in Israel. And though being Jewish thieves, having gone into thieving before they graduated high school, they didn't know the laws of taking the tithes. So they didn't tithe the tithe, the amount you have to take before you use grain. You have to take off some of it and give it to the Kohen, to the poor person, to the Levi, the different gifts here. So they hadn't tithed it, they hadn't taken Meiser. So Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair's donkey, being owned by a holy person, was itself holy and wouldn't eat anything that wasn't kosher, essentially. So we say that we're not as spiritually sensitive as even Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair's donkey. So Rabbi Yosselman says as follows. He says, well, this is the answer. Since Avram's sheep were at least as holy as Pinchas ben Yair's donkey, so as long as it was Avram's well and Avram's sheep, they would drink from it. But he says to Avimelech, I'm making you a gift of these sheep. Once I give you these sheep, they're not mine anymore, they're yours, and because the well is mine, they will not drink from it, no matter how thirsty they are. Because they're religious sheep. And therefore you will see that the well is mine. And the idea is that we all take, there's a very deep idea in this, we all take responsibility for the portion of the world apportioned to us. And if we truly live as we should, this influences everything around us, even our animals. And you know what? It's not such a crazy idea. You notice that unpleasant people tend to have unpleasant dogs and vice versa. Right? If your dog was owned by someone who was a horrible person, he's a big, strong dog, and be biting everyone. But because he lives in the Sherman's house, he just licks everyone, right? So, but there's a deep truth to this that we really do, and that's, by the way, one of the connections of the Rosh Hashanah. That by living as we should, since the purpose of creation is that we utilize the world in a positive way, in a subtle way, maybe not as obvious as this, but the point of this story in the Talmud is that in a subtle way, we influence the whole world. We make it godly and harmonized, till everything works as it should, by our behavior. So all the more so, said by one of the commentators of Serpents Menorah's donkey is, that if a righteous person can influence their donkey, all the more so that if we live righteously, we influence others, not by preaching at them, not by yelling at them, but by example. On Rosh Hashanah, we don't commit to telling people what to do. We commit to accepting God's rulership on ourselves. We commit to us being the best Jews and people we can be. And by taking that personal responsibility, if we live it well, we'll influence others too. And even beyond perhaps the human race. But certainly other people. And it's not coincidental that Rosh Hashanah represents the last two and greatest tests of Avram. Sending Ishmael and Hagar away was a great test, and sacrificing Yitzchak was a great test. And one validates the other. Because this willingness to sacrifice Yitzchak demonstrated that he was completely committed to God as the ultimate, because A, it went against all his ideas of right and justice and decency. But secondly, if he sends away Ishmael, he favors one child. If he sends away Ishmael and is willing to sacrifice Yitzchak, it shows that it wasn't at all about personal feelings. But Abraham did two very difficult things, one after the other, that seemed incomprehensible because ultimately they were really good. And it's interesting, God promises Abraham that his son will be, Ishmael will become a great nation. But he doesn't tell that to Hagar. Hagar only finds that out once she gets distance. Once she goes to do her thing. And right, so, traditionally, if the gods don't like someone, right, you read Iliad or the Odyssey, the gods pursue them until they destroy them, or try to anyways. Here, you have someone who God sends away. But what happens? God saves him, God blesses him, God reassures his mother. In other words, this is part of the picture, this is part of the story. And, in other words, there's a way of looking when someone says, I have the ultimate truth, so no one else does. Hashem says no. Everyone has a role and a goal and a purpose and a portion of the truth. But again, the point of focus are the Jewish people. Because there's as much compassion in the story of Hagar and Ishmael, right? They survive. And more than that, there's a midrash that says that the angel saw the trouble the Ishmaelites would make for the Jews. And they say, God, why do you give him life? God says, I look at him as he is now. Right now he's righteous. He's asking me for help. And what that means is that God takes the big picture. God looks not at where people are right now, but where they could be when they finally wake up and know that they need to listen to the lessons that flow through Yitzchak's children. One of the interesting things we say is it says that in one place it says that Ishmael dwelt upon the face of all his brothers. And later it says he fell. It says as long as he acknowledged his place and his relationship to Avram as it was, he dwelled. Once Avram died and he, lost the sense of his role and his place, he fell. In other words, when and again, we're not this. Obviously, anyone who wants the Jew can be a Jew, but it's only in the context of Judaism you have this intense relationship to Hashem, and that's expressed in Rosh Hashanah. An intense relationship to God, distilled to this focal point, is what gives us a clear vision of the purpose of existence, which then you can share with everyone else. Conversely, all of the prayers of Rosh Hashanah talk about the whole world, which tells us that we're not doing our job unless we share it with everyone. It's the other factor. Because how does everyone know that, in other words, you don't know what Rosh Hashanah has to say unless you share it. So there's, on one hand, it's about the Jewish people, on the other hand, it's about them sharing. And this balance is crucial. And, that's why we talk about the world and everyone in the world, not just the Jewish people. It's not the day the Jewish people are judged, it's the day the world is judged. And those are the Psalms we select. So this interplay, on one hand, and there's one last point, which is that Avram is asked to do a very harsh thing, to send his own wife and child away. But and many would argue, as people do, it's unjust, it's unethical, it's immoral. And the answer is the definition of what's right is not what you feel right now is right. Because there's a lot of things that we know from the Torah or even our own gut feeling we understand now they're not right, and they were perfectly acceptable 300 years ago or 200 years ago, and so on. Ultimately, the only arbitrator of what's right or wrong is the one who created the world and gave it its purpose. Only the Torah contains both morality that makes sense and morality that doesn't make sense to people at a given time and place. And it's that immutable thing that it's our job to share with people. And that's why, Hagar and Ishmael are in here, not because it's merely sort of a throwaway line or an emphasis on Yitzchak. Then we could just end with sending them away. We give this whole account that it's their relationship to the same God of Avram and Yitzchak, but as defined by Avram and Yitzchak, they give them their purpose too. And at the same time, we have to be willing to understand that we have to do what's right, not what makes us feel good. There are many things we say, I would feel better if Judaism did things differently. I would feel better if, You know what? I think 5 p.m. on a Sunday is the best time for a Seder. But if it comes out 8:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, that's when you do it. And when I say I think it feels better, you basically take it entirely out of being something transcendent we connect to, and it just becomes something we create for ourselves. But this is essentially the relationship between the purpose of Rosh Hashanah and the Torah reading of the first day, which conceivably in the land of Israel might have been the only Torah reading. Think about it. There were years in the land of Israel where this was read and the binding of Isaac was not read, which tells you that it must be central. There were years in Israel when the temple was standing. Most years had 2 days, but some years had 1 day. Because basically, Rosh Hashanah is the only Jewish holiday that's on the new moon. So we don't know till the afternoon if someone in the Golan Heights saw the new moon. So if they get there in time, it's 1 day. If they don't get there in time, we keep the 30th day of Elul as the first day of Rosh Hashanah. And then if we discover that the new moon was only seen the next night, or the eyewitnesses only didn't see it the first night, they only see it the second night, so then there's two. Then Rosh Hashanah will have 2 days: 1 day waiting and 1 day actual.
But why then? Now it's Tishrei 1 and 2 rather than.
Because since in the time of the temple, they always celebrated. The fact became that most of the time was 2 days, which grants it was 30th and 1st, right? But in order to make the calendar work properly, Elul needs 29 days. The way they set up the calendar, 29:30, except Cheshvan and Kislev, which can switch. So basically, for the calendar to work well, it makes sense for Elul to have 29 days. So they simply put the...
Also, but you link it to the moon. How can you...
No. It's not linked directly to the moon now. In other words, even if the new moon appears a day later, appears on the 30th of Elul, we still treat it as the first day of Tishrei. Now it's with a calendar. If you look at the actual new moon times that are published, for hunters or for the tides, they're not always on Rosh Chodesh. Because we want the calendar to work, we don't really care if the new moon is a day off. Shouldn't be more than a day off, but a day or two off is fine.
How then it corresponds to the...
Oh, because it works by the average. The average lunar cycle.
No, I understand that, but how it corresponds to the first mitzvah, basically, Rosh Chodesh.
Because a Chodesh is Elochem, you declare it. It's yours. And Rashi says even if you make a mistake. But over here, the point is that there's another factor, which is that because there are a lot of variations as to when the moon appears as compared to its average time, so Maimonides points out that the way the calendar is set up, Rosh Chodesh is usually very close to the actual new moon in Israel as opposed to the calculated new moon. In other words, a lot of the days that Rosh Chodesh seems to be a day after the new moon, it's closer to the actual new moon. Maimonides writes about this.
In Israel.
Right, and that's why if you get the Karaite email for when they decide Rosh Chodesh is, or the Samaritan email, I don't know if the Samaritans have an email system, but the Karaites do. Very often the day they have a Rosh Chodesh is the day we have as Rosh Chodesh, because they actually see the moon and send out emails, and the actual appearance is very often the same as Rosh Chodesh. But they have a website and emails. And they even have a synagogue in Albany. I think Albany, New York, and like somewhere in Washington State. Yeah. I don't know what they do because they don't have any rabbinical customs. I don't know exactly what their service consists of. Anyway, so that's the core theme of Rosh Hashanah, and we'll look at the Akedah that gives us the binding of Isaac, gives us some understanding of sort of how. This is what we need to do. The Akedah tells something of the how. So what I'll conclude with is that the Torah readings of all the holidays, as we'll see, do not so much, they don't so much tell us necessarily directly about the holidays, certainly not on the high holidays. They tell us about what we need to be doing and where we need to be. And that's why the Torah readings, they're literally teaching us as to how we need to live. And what are the core themes we need to be focusing on.